Shut it down! We're ready for justice and change.
That was the scene from the streets of Minneapolis on Saturday throughout the day and into the evening. Protesters that are once again demanding for accountability and justice when it comes to yet another person who was killed by Minneapolis police officers. Now, this particular thing happened with a 22-year-old Amir Locke after they conducted yet another no-knock warrant, broke into a house and shot 22-year-old Locke immediately within the 9 to 10 seconds of them entering the premises. So if you guys have heard this story about bloodthirsty police and how they're jumping in, and of course, Breonna Taylor, yes, we're all tired of hearing it, but you can only imagine how Amir's parents feel. Let's see what they had to say.
This is very, very detrimental and heart-wrenching and hard. I should be able to tell my son that I love you and he says I love you too. But now I have to do that in spirit. I can't do it in the flesh. That's not right.
Amir was a bright light, and he deserves to be able to shine. I didn't think my son.
I believe that he was executed by the MPD, and I want the police officer that murdered my son to be prosecuted and fired.
It's a place no parent should really be, especially in these kinds of circumstances. But let's get to some of the details of what happened there. So body camera footage released on Thursday, it showed that the officers executed a no-knock search warrant before coming across Locke, who had been sleeping under a blanket on the couch. He's seen holding a gun as he begins to sit up, still covered by the blanket, before he shot less than 10 seconds after they entered the room. Now, about that gun, Locke's parents said that he owned the gun legally and had to protect himself from carjackers while making deliveries for DoorDash. Apparently things have been getting a little bit too dicey and he was looking for some protection. So Amelia Huffman, who's the interim Minneapolis police chief, said that on our Wednesday news conference that officers loudly and repeatedly announced a police search warrant before crossing the threshold into the apartment, and said Locke pointed a loaded gun in the direction of the officers, and that prompted one of them to fire at him. Now, I'm not gonna show the video of the no-knock warrant that happened that everyone did see at the end of last week, but it disproved that point that the police chief did say there. Now, continuing on, the warrant was issued in relation to a homicide investigation led by detectives from the neighboring St. Paul Police Department. Locke was not named in that warrant, and Minneapolis police have acknowledged that it was unclear how or whether he was connected to that investigation. So also the mayor of Minneapolis said that they're temporarily putting in a no-knock warrant, a stoppage to it for now, temporarily. We'll figure this out and we'll see if we can do it again next month. Now, everyone's talking about, again, this has happened again. Should the police officers get prosecuted and fired? All the similar stories. But what I want to talk about is why we're here again, because we keep going through this. And before it happens again, maybe we'll point out why we've gotten here through our politicians, through our laws, and through fake legislation or proposed legislation that never meant to go anywhere. So let's go straight into what President Joe Biden said about this in April of last year about things like this.
I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress.
We've seen that knee of injustice on the necks of Black Americans. And if Congress has the courage, let's find out if Congress has had the courage since then. Because some people even had a little bit of hope because Republican Tim Scott was proposing a legislation to do something about this. Let's watch that.
Democrats are calling for an outright ban on certain measures like a chokehold or the so-called no-knock warrant.
Yes.
In your proposal, you are saying these things should be tied to federal funding, that if departments go ahead with them, they risk losing funding. And yet you also said today that this is something that should be debated. The chokehold should be debated for the American people to hear. So it sounds like you're open to a complete ban on a chokehold. Is that right?
Well, I would say it this way. My legislation gets us to the position where if you are a law enforcement department that does not already have a ban on chokeholds, you do not have access to the federal funding.
I want you guys to remember him saying that. You do not have access to federal funding. It was also written in this part of this legislation, what Tim Scott was saying. According to his proposal, police departments would have to follow basic federal standards on some practices like banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants, or else they would lose federal funding. Lose federal funding. Remember that. He wrote it in the legislation and he said it. A few months after that, let's see what he said about that.
I am not going to participate in reducing funding for the police after we saw major city after major city to fund the police. Many provisions in this bill that he wanted me to agree to limited or reduced funding for the police. That's a lose. That's a lose proposition. So when you tie funding losses in this legislation, you should expect an allergic reaction from me. We have about $1 billion in grant money that goes to police. When you start saying in order to receive those dollars, you must do A, B, and C, and if you don't do A, B, and C, you literally lose eligibility. When you tell local law enforcement agencies that you are ineligible for money, that's defunding the police. There's no way to spin that.
There's no way to spin it unless your legislation said if you don't do A, B, and C, you're gonna lose funding. And then this guy who looks just like you said the opposite, and he can't deal with that because it's allergic to him. Now, by the way, Democrats aren't pushing them hard enough. Republicans don't want anything to do with this. And all we're left is with images like this of Republican lawmakers, David. Let's see this picture, and then I promise you can jump in on this. Let's see what Democrats have been doing when it comes to protecting black folks in this country. Putting on kente cloths and kneeling down and hoping people go, oh, that's great, I'll vote for you now. Well, Amir Locke is dead, David.
Yeah, I mean, look, if there's no solidarity that you can have with somebody who's been killed, right? And you can kneel, you can do whatever they want to do in Congress. The fact of the matter is, it's so clear, and I'm glad you pointed out to Tim Scott, there's nothing that is getting done in Congress. So we can't count on politicians in Washington, we can't count on either party to pass common sense gun reform or even police reform for that matter. So then it becomes a matter of, well, is there anything that we can do in terms of local communities to get the police departments to change their culture? And I think, and this is where I feel like so frustrated, because the answer is no. This was an African American, these were white cops. If the situation had been reversed, I guarantee the cops would not have opened fire within 10 seconds. But there is this culture among police across every department in the United States now that they have to dominate. You must use overwhelming force and dominate every situation, especially if it's an African American. You can't pause and say, hey, let's try to de-escalate things or show us your hands or what are you doing with the gun? No, you just open fire. To me, that is outrageous. It is racist, it's sadistic, it is beyond horrible.
It's this automatic fear, and you see it, oh, there's a gun there, time to shoot, because they figure it's expendable enough within society that they're not gonna really be held so much accountable for. This is such a subconscious thought process that it's not a matter of a white officer. A black Latino officer could do the exact same thing because that's the thought process. Now, why are we doing no-knock warrants where you barge in there and you don't know what's going on and you just start shooting? What's the point of the warrant if you're just shooting? Oh, the point of the warrant is to say that you had a right to go in shooting like that. That's really what it's based off of. Now, if whether or not we're gonna change this before this happens to another person, we'll see. Do they care enough about the pushback that's happened? Are we gonna talk about, are they rioting in the streets again? Or more people getting killed in homes that weren't doing anything?